All right, it is just a few minutes after 2, so we will go ahead and get started. Tracy, do you mind doing the roll call, please?
Mrs. Hudson?
Present.
Mrs. Davis?
Present.
Whew, that was really long. We'll move on to agenda item 2A. Review of policies involving naming rights of school facilities. So, Randy, you were kind enough to pull together not only our existing policies, but also sample policies from surrounding jurisdictions to give us a sense for the variety of what's out there. Are there some things that you would like to share to tee up this discussion?
Yeah, I'll simply share that we are in a situation where we're doing major high school renovation projects in basically New Thomas Worthington. And in looking at Upper Arlington schools, there was a huge opportunity for them to engage the community and raise money. In addition, it created a known pathway for families that were dealing with estates and money that created this avenue for people to give to the district. And so I'm not presenting this for a conversation because I want to go on a huge campaign where we're raising money for a specific item. But I do think there's the opportunity, if there are new classrooms or new areas of our school, that if somebody wanted to donate, do they even know how to do that? So Upper Arlington put a price on every single room, from the flagpole to the ice room to the, Black Box Theater, and it worked for them. And I know that they raised, was it five, seven? Yeah, I thought it was $7 to $8 million. So from where I sit, it's about not missing an opportunity rather than having like this agenda. Our policies were written to kind of shut down those conversations so that we didn't have a lot of board pressure to, TJ retires and all of his staff want us to name the offices after him.
Of course.
Yeah, there were things in there that talked about certain conditions that must occur so that the board didn't get hit. So this would be a complete reversal. And because of that, I thought that it was probably going to be multiple steps with the board policy committee and then ultimately the board as to whether or not we want to go down this path. But it could be, we're talking about a student boulevard from the west end of Thomas that connects to the football stadium, tree-lined walkway. Part of that, we'd like to make a memorial walkway where blocks are put in recognizing people that have already had memorials on our property, but part of it's a good opportunity to raise sponsorship. It could be that families want to buy a block. Obviously, I think those two areas should be separate on the walkway, but there's so anywhere from $100 donation to, if you look at Upper Arlington, some of them were well over $50,000 to $100,000. So however we want to address it, but it touches like 3 or 4 different policies, I think, from naming rights to memorials. So
Gifts, grants, and
And the big
gifts.
one, I guess if I could just add to it, my feeling is the board needs to determine whether we want to be more active in this environment or whether we want to maintain a passive type of atmosphere that we have. So our current policy, I would say, is passive. I don't know if either of you have been in Upper Arlington, but there's names on everything, business and individuals. As he mentioned, they sold the rights to the science wing, the art room, the library. So I think that's the first step, is do we want to be more aggressive in trying to generate those funds? And really what Upper Arlington did with those funds is they used them on things that they otherwise wouldn't have done, right? So this is a step above what we would expect taxpayers to fund. So things that might have been a wish list item became reality because of those funds, and that's how they viewed it. And so if you look at their process, at their policy 7250, it goes into a whole litany of things. And really, one of the bigger questions, I think, is if we want to take an active approach, are we going to engage a consultant to take on that workload, right?
yeah, I would hope so.
And how do we do that? Are we willing to use general fund money to seed that? Things like that. So those are all part of the policy. There's a resolution that we would pass if we wanted to do it, setting up that fund. I think it's, and I will say this, I think it's more challenging in a two-school district, right, than it would be, because we also have to think about equity. And one of the biggest things I learned from the discussions with Upper Arlington and their attorneys, you want to make sure, you know, you you donate the funds to get your name, but the district maintains discretion on what we're going to do with that money, right?
Absolutely.
So you're not going to tell us, well, I'm donating to the science wing and I want it to have this.
Yeah.
And you have agreements in place that specify all that so that we have discretion on what we're going to do with the money you are donating to get your name on the item.
And the good news is, I mean, that all makes complete smart business sense because it protects both entities and expectations in writing, right? And the good news is most people, when making a financial contribution, have that degree of trust or they wouldn't be doing it in the first place. So the paperwork and spelling out those terms are just incredibly smart, again, because it makes sure that everyone's on the same page with regards to expectations, but usually the terms themselves aren't an issue because that degree of trust is there. I'm sorry, you have an ear infection. I just said that the good news, first of all, having the parameters in writing between the donors and the district makes a lot of sense, right? It's the mentality of we're all on the same page and memorialize it protects everyone involved. And the good news is when someone's making a financial contribution, the underlying trust that is, you know, in other words, putting a paper in front of someone is not going to, saying we need to memorialize this agreement should not be an issue because the underlying trust that is needed is already there, because that's what part of what goes into wanting to make that financial contribution. So I'm just fully supporting the fact that we would want to memorialize the terms of the contributions and and protect both the expectations of the individual and the discretion of the district. I just want to share that when I first was interested in serving on this board, so go back to 2017, there was a lot of chatter in the community about the fact that we, for whatever reason, have never really tapped into our alumni, and we haven't been intentional about maintaining connection from the standpoint of avenues to give back to the community. So this, when you first approached me with this idea and shared what Upper Arlington had done, makes me very excited because I feel like it's a step in that direction and in a logical time in the history of this district to do so, because of the opportunities that are in front of us. Kelly, how did it land with you?
I think it is a great opportunity. I kind of hear a lot of what TJ is saying because I think it will be very Thomas focused with Thomas being rebuilt, making sure to include Kilbourne in this process as well, being mindful of that. I have been to Upper Arlington, or Rondell's been there too, and they do have a name for everything, so I don't necessarily know that I would want to necessarily go that approach. But I do think it's a way to honor people. And like you said, it's a way for the community to give back and to do things. Do you have an information about a list of what is already named here in Worthington?
Yes, Tim's working on that.
Okay.
With our principals. I have it. I actually have it. Our principals started to fill it out, so I can pull it up. But in Upper Arlington, this was the list that they put together as far as what was up. I will tell you a conversation I had with someone who was a little bit concerned that a facility could be torn down and renamed to a donor. Their interpretation of that was that the district was valuing the dollar more than the dedication. So you take a person who spent their whole career working for Worthington Schools and they have this facility named after them. Facility's torn down, new facility goes up, and whoever has the most money gets their name on it, not the person who dedicated their career. So I want to make sure that if we have, you know, if we have a science classroom that's named after a teacher and we tear that science classroom down, perhaps the new science classroom somehow memorializes that person, but yet it could be named after someone else if, you know, I don't know. I think finding compromise in that area because it's a sensitive topic.
Understandably so, absolutely. I would think that you hit the nail on the head. A key component of this is not just potentially moving forward, but moving forward in an intentional way where we respect and honor what's been done historically, especially if it is being impacted by the construction projects. And I hear you loud and clear, Kelly. We will need to be also very intentional about, if we go forward with this, about what opportunities are being presented at Thomas to ensure that there are analogous opportunities or comparable opportunities at Kilbourne so that there is a lift in that community as well, or at that school, and they see the benefit from it as well.
I just think that would be bring community together. You would have a whole district community conversation about it rather than just a Thomas conversation about it.
Absolutely. And honestly, like there's a part of me that this worked for Upper Arlington and that's great. There's a part of me that shies away from that degree of naming rights and moving away from that degree and wanting to come up with something that is more comparable to being implemented at both schools probably goes hand in hand, right? Like we're not gonna, if we don't go to that degree of detail, then we already put ourselves in a position where we can find something that finds balance at, even if it's not the same as equitable at both schools. So I will just say, overarching, I personally am very supportive of exploring this path. I would think that in the interest of time and the interest of our peers, what they would expect out of the work of the policy committee, that we could maybe put together some framework of what we would propose, make sure that they're aligned, and then get into the details of what that would look like. Does that sound like a reasonable course of action?
Yep. And I shared with you the high school principals helped me put together places within their buildings where they knew were already named. I think some of them were like permanently named that, I think assumed so. And the Hamilton Field, when I talked with our former athletic director, Dan Gerard, he told me that that gift came with a specific amount of time that that field would be called Hamilton Field. And he couldn't remember if it was 15 or 20 years. If it was 15, we're approaching that. So that came with a specific dollar amount for naming rights for a specific period of time. And that may be kind of the format we want to follow to say, with this gift, this is what we can guarantee. So
Yeah, there's a lot of, that makes sense, right? Because you have no idea what the future holds for a district, right? And what their needs will be, and thinking that something would be permanent is probably.
yeah, what's hard is when it's memorial, because you're always going to have a descendant of someone who's still in the community that says, wait a minute, you're taking my great-grandfather's name off of.
So I will tell you, there's an idea there. I'm sure that others have thought of lots of workarounds there. One idea that just comes to mind, and I think of this because I have a memorial at the Park of Roses in honor of a friend of mine who's deceased, and that's something that's renewed. So you do it for a certain, depending on the financial amount, right? You do it for a certain period of time, and then you give what's called a right of first refusal. So you go back to that family first, and you give them the opportunity to extend it before you open it up to others. So I do think that there are going to be a lot of them, but there are things that like we're going to have to think about workarounds and to ensure that we're appropriately honoring and respecting the families who have chosen to make this a means by which they honor their loved ones and commit and financially support the district.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, Upper Arlington, do you know, like, when they drafted this policy, did they base it on something that Neola provided for them, or they drafted it?
Yeah, Tracy
From
did
scratch.
this. Yeah, Tracy did the search and we couldn't find another district that actually had this number. So we assumed that they sat down with their attorney and created their own policy,
Okay.
Okay,
which gives us greater flexibility.
absolutely.
They did do this, I mean, their attorney is Scott Scriven, so I spoke with Julie about this.
Okay,
So that's a link there that we have.
that's nice. Do we want to talk about just like, I'm glad to take notes. Do we want to talk about just like general guidelines or boundaries that we would want to propose
Sure.
to the broader board and then see if they are aligned and come back then, like I said, and get into the details? So one guideline obviously is that for the specific construction that we have in front of us, that we would want to ensure that we created a degree of equity between the two high schools. Is that okay?
Right.
So whatever is currently unnamed at both schools would have the opportunity to be named. That type of equity as well as how the funds are spent.
Yeah, I mean, I would think there's two avenues there, right? There's the opportunity to name, donate to facilities, but then also, going back to my point, a donor that wants to donate and name the Thomas Worthington Science Wing for X dollars, we can choose to say we're going to make sure whatever we use that money on is equitably spent at both buildings, right?
Mhm.
So I think there's both avenues there.
Yeah, I follow you. So, yeah. So it can be in the naming portion or the spending portion.
Right.
Um,
Because there is a concern that Thomas has such a longer history because the school opened so much earlier that their alumni base has more access to resources. So,
Yeah, and so, I mean, you could have someone who would currently, if they were still living in the district where they went to Thomas, would now go to Kilbourne. And so, giving to, hopefully presented in a manner that you're giving it to the benefit of both schools makes sense. So the equity between the schools, and again, that's both in the naming and or the spending portion. We know, I think the sense I get, just based upon what you said, Kelly, and what I said, but I'm open, you guys, like, that because of that constraint and maybe initial reaction to that, that we don't anticipate going to the degree of what's been set forth from a opportunity standpoint as that Upper Arlington put together, but there are, I mean, maybe we can look at this and come up with some things that are great examples of things that would be included.
That's why I think it would be helpful to know what is already named. to
yeah, I
kind of
shared
get-
it with you. There's not much. It's stadiums. Stadiums at both schools, football fields at both schools, basketball court at Thomas, main gym at Thomas, auditorium at Thomas, natatorium, press box at Thomas, track at Thomas, baseball field at Thomas.
So nothing for Kilbourne.
Kilbourne, just the
Or where you said
stadium,
both fields.
just the stadium and the football field is the
Okay.
only thing they put on the document.
Okay.
So maybe we create a spreadsheet of the spaces, both schools, indicating if it's been already accounted for or if it's open. And then that will give us a better picture of
Yeah.
what's available.
I think I shared about half of that with you in the document that I just shared, but
Okay,
I didn't put every single thing on there because they have a lot, but,
oh, you already put it on there? Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll open it up right now.
so,
Okay, that's good. So when you have natatorium, just for example, that's for, you have it under Thomas, but that's a Kilborn Thomas facility.
Right, but I just put it under both, so, because I didn't know
Okay.
who would know, because I sent this to both schools.
And of the ones that you have noted here, you mentioned the agreement related to Hamilton Field. Are there any other agreements that we're aware of that have?
No, in the Bob Miller Court, that was relatively recent, so that's one that I can recall, and I'm not sure what process, if any, they went through with the Board of Education to put his name on the court. I think it might have been a building decision where they were having the floor redone, the coach was retiring, so they had that, it's actually on the court, it says Bob Miller Court. So there's no plaque, it's just every time we refinish the floor, we either need to include that or, so.
All
You
right.
said that was recently, sorry.
Yeah, it was within the last 10 years.
Okay.
Those are the two that I can remember. And I,
So obviously, another step is, or another key point is to review the existing naming rights, including searching for any historical documents that memorialize the agreement, and if no such agreements exist, engaging in a conversation with the families to understand what their expectation was and determine best paths forward.
yeah, and so I talked with the Dow Nelson family because we're currently demolishing that building. And I said that we've yet to determine how we're moving forward with that, because I'm not even sure the history if the whole complex was called Dow Nelson, but the sign just happened to be on that building. So people thought the building was the Dow Nelson Fieldhouse, but really it was the Dow Nelson Sports Complex. And then Hamilton Field was within the Dow Nelson. I don't know, but what I told his daughter was that we would make sure that that name's not forgotten, but we hadn't determined that that building was going to be called the Dow Nelson Fieldhouse. But that somehow Dow Nelson would still be memorialized
Okay.
at that
Sorry for
park.
interrupting.
And they were fine, and Tim offered to take them the plaque that was on there, and then I think he's going to take a brick from the building and deliver it to the family. And like I said, they'll work with us on that.
Very nice.
But there's also a brick wall. So we took out like 7 memorial trees, or we will when we take out. And so Tim's dealing with each one of those families, and some of them go back quite a ways. But then there's a coaching memorial wall where you have Gary Smith and a number of other. We're not touching that with this project. So when I did speak with Gary Smith's relatives, I assured them that we have no plans to touch that area. But
Excellent.
This is next to the field house, you mean?
yeah, it's kind of, the field house is here and the ticket booth is here.
Yeah.
That little wall sits closer to the ticket booth.
Okay.
It's about that high, but it has their faces on it.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yep. I know.
It's not really a facility, and I don't see any reason to touch that because it's not impacted. But
Right.
like the auditorium at Thomas will be an issue when I look at this list, because that auditorium will be completely torn down,
Right.
rebuilt. So that one's probably, and the natatorium are the two on here that kind of pop off the page for me. We honestly wouldn't have to touch anything else because the baseball field, the orientation may change, but the location's going to be basically the same. So
Still would be good in this process to ensure that we take the time to track down any documentation and ensure we're on the same page with everyone, just to do a clean level
Yeah.
set
Yep.
at the same time.
Yep.
And you mentioned this earlier, TJ. If we take this on, this is a specialty. The people, are professional fundraisers. I would assume that the district would be in best hands if we were to hire someone, and that individual would also be fairly sophisticated in helping navigate situations where you have legacy naming rights and maybe no clear documentation relating to them, and trying to figure out a best path forward that honors all those being memorialized and creates opportunities for the district as well.
Yeah, and I think TJ talked with Upper Arlington about how the board, didn't they, or was it a volunteer there, or?
They had a group of volunteers there. They had a couple donors step forward at the beginning, significant donors to kind of get the ball rolling. What they did was they created two funds, a capital fund where all the donations went into to provide for future items. But they also did a subset of the operating of the general fund. They just used theirs for postage, so they basically said, we'll commit to operating funds on helping send flyers, materials, printing. When I talk with legal counsel, we could use operating funds. It would be a proper public purpose if we wanted to pay a consultant. So we could do that through simply just paying them. We could advance it, and then any money that was donated up front would then go back to cover the cost of that consultant first if we wanted to politically navigate it that way. But it is an option. It is a proper public purpose for us to engage a consultant if that's what we want to do to do that.
The
Okay.
board would have to allocate that.
Board, yeah, it would be part of our budget. We would set up a fund. Like I said, there'd be a formal resolution outlining this, and then you would set a budget.
So what I hear you saying is we could hire it out. It's proper public purpose. If we don't hire it out, and we did it by committee, so I think I mentioned to you, I know someone in our community who actually does this professionally. I'm
Right.
sure that individual is not the only person in our community who does this professionally. We may have professional fundraisers in our community who are willing to assist with this project, but even in doing so, we would there may still be then a need for us to either take a portion of the general budget for things like flyers and postage and things like that, or structure it such that some of the donations that come back reimburse those.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think at a minimum, what Upper Arlington learned was, you can get folks to volunteer time, but there are going to be costs. And so
I'll say it,
you
yep.
want to at least cover that part, whether we want to cover, and to your point, it could be a person or it could be a committee with a lead person, and, it could be a consulting firm. I mean, there's probably any number of ways you can structure it. At the end of the day, though, we could use general fund to pay an entity, a person, or simply just subsidize the materials.
I mean, I think there's the pay for the person who's doing the work, there's the postage, and then there's the dilemma of would that travel expenses. So if they needed to fly to Denver to meet with an alum that was considering making a large gift, would that be covered? And would that be something that the board would want those expenses to go to? Or, I think there's layers of this. So as long as all of that's spelled out as to what the money could be used for.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that came up when I spoke with Julie, and travel, entertainment type things, fundraisers. That's where it gets harder when you consider what's a proper public purpose. Right, it gets a little into a grayer area, so we would have to be careful of those sorts of things. And I should mention how this interacts with the foundation, some of our other groups, and we have to be cognizant of where this leads and what potentially could be asked of the board of those entities.
I hear you. For some reason, it's interesting. I hear you loud and clear, and at the same time, I think of them as very different ways of giving.
Just something to think about.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a very good point.
I think that's more of a quantity donation, and this is more of fewer donations at a higher level.
Higher, yeah.
So it could be the same people,
That's
but it's
honestly how I put it in my head too.
I
I
mean,
thought,
we're looking to engage 50 to 100 people with what we're talking about today. I think the Ed Foundation looks to engage many, many more people
At
a
lower
at a
price
lower
points.
level.
yeah.
And not only people, but businesses.
Yeah.
Upper Arlington got a lot of money from technology companies and their science labs and their STEM places.
And I think, didn't Upper Arlington outline that they wanted it to be people-based, not company-based?
That I don't know. I mean, I know they got a significant amount of money from corporate donors.
Oh, did they?
I know, like, there's the Russilli family name at Upper Arlington on something that family donated. It didn't say Russilli Construction. It said the Russilli family. So I didn't know.
So that can be another point of review as to whether or not we want to focus on individuals or do we want to allow for individuals plus corporations.
It does, there was some, and maybe we have that in our current policy about school appropriate. So,
Yeah, I guess that's my question is how do you present it to the community to, is there an application process? Or is that when you are getting down to like the nitty gritty of
like,
how you decide?
yeah, that's, I don't know, like, does it mean that they fill out an application that they're interested in giving the money and then each application comes to the board or to the board naming committee or to the district naming, like, I don't know how that works, but like,
So approval process is another one.
like, wasn't there an issue? I don't know. I thought there was an issue a while back with a donor at Kilbourne High School that got kind of messy. And then
Press
you know,
box, yeah.
if you had a,
Press box?
Yeah.
Is that what you said?
Yeah.
it was one of those situations where it wouldn't have been good to have the name. I think there was some criminal investigations or something. I'm not sure.
Well, I mean, yeah, there can be all sorts of things, right? Like, so you have a company that's known for being anti-LGBTQ plus, and do we really want their name memorial,
Yeah.
as corporate sponsors of a
Yeah.
portion of any portion of our school? Yeah, like it can be.
Like if
Yeah, and I think when you have time to read through Upper Arlington's, they address that in depth and what
Okay.
could happen
Good.
if that entity later made statements that went against the educational philosophy of the school district. I think you lay all that out in your agreement.
Makes sense.
We spend time, as briefly looking at this, it does look like they present it to a facilities committee for consideration, who then recommends it to the board in terms of approval process. So,
Okay. And we do already have a facilities committee, right? And so that facilities committee could theoretically take on this portion of that portion of the
naming?
work. Yeah, the vetting portion of it before it comes to the board for final approval.
and I assume some of these questions can be answered by a consultant who does this and knows more about this than Randy or I, but so that would be good to get their input as well.
So personally, I would be comfortable hiring and recommending to our peers that we hire a consultant. I would also be completely comfortable with doing a little bit of due diligence in our personal networks within our community to see how many of us know professional fundraisers who live in our community who might be willing to dedicate a portion of time to not feel responsible for the entire lift, but to be one person at a table who's contributing to this project.
Yeah, it's definitely networking. So whoever we hire to do, like, we're gonna have to get like a subcommittee of people that they can start with. And I think there's probably a technical side to this too. Like, so you may be really good at the fundraising piece, but developing a website that corresponds with what we're doing and having a place where people can check in to see how it's progressing. Like, I think that would be critical too.
Oh, really? I'm only laughing because if you ever run for public office, you will figure out how to do that.
Yeah.
Or find someone within your network who knows
Yes.
how to do that. Kelly and I can both tell you
Yeah.
that. We can
Yeah.
probably find someone who can handle
Yeah.
websites.
But I think that's a big
Websites,
piece,
social
yeah.
media,
Yeah.
like all those things that, yeah.
But that's how this will grow. And I just think the timing, from my standpoint, if we can have some conversations this winter and get this kind of rolling a little bit and then really start to launch it in the spring when we're preparing for construction.
I was gonna say, are you looking for this just to start with the field house?
Yeah, I think the field house could be the first thing on the list and we just hold it because we have held money for the sign for the field house, but we've not done anything. But I think whatever we decide is open and available.
And
So you're saying spring, like timeline to kind of.
We'd have to do 2 readings and we'd have to post a position or figure out if we want to go the consultant route.
There's 2 readings, there'd be a board policy, a resolution that we'd have to pass establishing the fund.
I think that, what is today, Wednesday? Our agenda goes out tomorrow. I think we bring this up during our board committee reports and we lay the foundation for our peers that this is something that we're considering. I think that even during that committee report, we can outline some of the parameters that we're already thinking we need to make sure that we set, get initial feedback on those. Kind of review in more detail Upper Arlington's and then come back and start working on a draft, if that all sounds reasonable from a policy standpoint.
Yeah.
The other thought that I just had as we were talking about timeline is just, it is good timing, Randy. It's excellent timing. And I don't want to miss the opportunity of laying a foundation for more alumni engagement. And so while everyone may not find themselves in a place to contribute to this particular endeavor, I guess I just want to think about what other ways we would want to intentionally engage alumni going forward. Because you're reaching out to people, right? And so if this isn't the right time for them and their family, that doesn't mean it's okay, we'll see you later in like 25 years, right? Like what can we think about? And I don't know how other schools engage their alumni. I mean, I get calls regularly from the schools that I've graduated from. But other than that, I mean, there's a lot of pride that comes from being involved and graduating from being a student of and then graduating from this district. And so
I know they're trying to revamp that too.
Yeah.
Alumni communication and trying to make a connection in a group.
Yeah.
I think
at the high school level for each of the schools?
I think at a district level.
District level? Okay, well,
As a
that's
whole
what
from both sides,
But I think
connecting to the alumni.
I think, though, to your point, the pride comes with something to be proud of, and 2 new high schools really times it perfectly. And who knows, it could open up to someone wants to make a $20,000 donation to Bluffs View Elementary, and we're not even thinking of that. Does that mean there's naming rights? And what do we name? Is it the library or is it this like the playground? Like this could spiral so many different areas. But
So that's where I kind of said at the beginning, like what I've talked with some people who do this, and they'll tell you that, for example, someone may name the Thomas Worthington Fieldhouse, right? And give dollars, but we already have dollars for the Fieldhouse, and we use those dollars on something else.
right.
And this is kind of why I brought up the foundation, is because I want to make it clear I didn't bring this up. So the law allows us to establish this fund for a 10-year period. Then those dollars have to be spent by that 10-year period, or they go to the general fund. So I hear what you're saying. Long term, how do we engage? It wouldn't be through this process. That would have to morph into another process. The law allows this particular process and fund to be developed for capital acquisition and construction. Fund has to dissolve in 10 years from when we establish it.
Okay, so that makes a lot of sense, and that's really good to know. When I was thinking long-term, how do we engage, I wasn't necessarily thinking just financial. And so it's understanding if there are individuals in our district who are already working on that alumni engagement, I feel like we need to invite them to our next policy meeting and have an initial discussion with them and understand the work that they're doing, so that we're partnering, right? And we're helping each other in our endeavor versus I can't imagine us being at odds, but so that we're intentionally partnering. I kind of feel like the same way with the foundation. Someone could learn of this opportunity, not financially be in a position to contribute to this opportunity. And wow, it would be really good for them to know the other ways in which they could contribute, right? And maybe that's a foundation route.
Are you talking about the Worthington Education Foundation?
Yes.
You
Yeah.
say foundation, okay.
Yeah. And so maybe reaching out to Pat Kelso and asking, for her to attend the next policy committee meeting as well, just so that we can get an update on what's going on in their world. Share this idea and, just make sure that we're all working together. We're all working for the benefit of the district, so we all should be on the same page.
Yeah.
Like a web page could only almost be divided into short-term with the Ed Foundation and longer term. And it could just be like a pathway to giving and supporting our school district.
Yeah.
And it could live beyond this drive during high school construction. But I think it gives us a great opportunity. And like I said, if nothing else, it shows that we put forth the effort and provided the opportunity. Now, whether or not we get $7 million, I don't even have those type of goals. But I think putting it out there and getting the right people involved in our community, whether that be estate planners or, people who are networked in the alumni group, I think that it's just a chance for people to see. I think we might be surprised.
I think it's a great opportunity. No, I really appreciate you bringing it to us. So are we aligned on, at our next board meeting, we'll bring our peers up to speed, and then we should schedule a next policy committee meeting, and we'll make invitations to whether it's Pat or someone else with the foundation to understand where they are, bring them into the fold on this work. And who are these people you speak of related to working on?
Well, I think I saw
Alumni.
Christy actually connecting alumni.
Mhm.
It's Christy upstairs.
Christy
Oh, okay.
Deweese.
Oh, fantastic. Okay.
Yeah,
So
if my memory serves me correctly.
we'll ask Christy if she can come down next policy committee meeting and join us in that manner. Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Would this be like a position we post and we interview people for, or would we
I think
contact
it would
corporations,
depend on, I think it would depend on whether we would,
contract service, or?
whether we're engaging consultant basis, whether this becomes an employee. Part of that honestly is guided by our control of the direction of the person, right? Are we telling this person what to do on a day-to-day basis, or are we saying, hey, we need help in this, you know how to do that, go do it? And that would be more consultant type role.
There's two different possibilities here. You could go to taxpayers and say, we're not using any tax dollars to run this campaign. It's self-sufficient. It's all donation driven. Or the opposite would be to say, we're not using any of the donations to pay my salary who helped that transaction take place. The district's paying my salary. I'm taking Nikki's donation, and that's 100% of her donation is going to the projects we're doing in the district. It's how you,
It's a
like,
balance.
like which way's better?
Yeah. The cheap part of me wants to first see if we can put together a committee.
Yeah.
And then my gut reaction, this is truly just my gut reaction, shut it down if you shoot it down if you think it should be otherwise. But I see logic in going with a consultant path first and determining whether or not a position is needed. Is this, even if it's part-time, is this a year-round endeavor, or is this something that,
Right.
I don't know. I would like to prove the need for it versus jumping into a position. That's just my gut.
I agree.
I like that.
And it may be that the board just sets aside X number of dollars for 12 months of this drive to see if it's self-sufficient
Yeah,
or not.
yeah. I'm sorry. Oh, no, you guys already answered that question. I was going to say, did Upper Arlington use a consultant? No, they had some big donors who came to the table,
Yeah,
and then they had
they just had volunteers, so they didn't even end up, the only thing they spent was postage, printing.
Okay.
There was a name on the top of that paper too, on the page one, that a contact, but
If anyone's listening into our policy committee meeting and is a professional fundraiser in our district, we would love to hear from you. Again, I know one person, so I'll reach out to that one person, but then I think we need to start spreading the word and we'll share it again on, at Monday's meeting. We'll make sure that's part of what we share with the board as a whole. Excellent. That's very exciting. Thank you for bringing this forward.
Sure.
And Randy, you're going, are you, can I talk? Are you going to look at the spaces that are already named and try to find some history behind that?
yeah, we can do that. Our policy 7250 talks about how periodically the district may want to name a facility. So it gives us great flexibility. Some of the other districts we pointed out, because I think it's a Neola option, says that the person must be deceased. So we're going to have to play with that language so that it fits with this process. And then obviously there would need to be some type of parameters around how long the naming rights would last and under what conditions it could be removed. But I think there's like 3 or 4 policies that could potentially be touched with this change. But if we can get the concept, I think it'll be real easy for us to get back together and just work on those 4 and make sure that they fit. But yeah, I'll continue to work on this list to get the history as to why and who and if there were any.
Because Nikki, you and I have talked about before, we've talked about in this meeting before about practice and how there's just practice. Well, this is what we've done, but if there isn't anything written out, there isn't anything spelled out. And so this will be a good opportunity. I see that as another opportunity to make sure that something is documented and written out as to what our practice and our
Absolutely.
process is.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. And so the plan is we'll come back together once we get feedback from the board as a whole, and we'll start to put a draft together. And I had talked about inviting other people to the table. Does it make sense to put that draft, like to schedule a meeting where we're working on the draft and maybe at the end of the meeting or beginning of the meeting, like one or the other, but essentially not have those guests sit through the entire thing? Or to have a separate meeting with them, either one. I don't have a preference. I just am trying to be respectful of people's time and thinking about the fact that our next meeting will be somewhat of a working session, a work
Yeah.
session.
I think you had them I think it is one meeting. You had them at the beginning and then they
leave. And okay, so at least we're letting them know and getting their feedback as to where they are, getting input on things that they may view as important, and then we can go to our drafting part. Okay. I know we have one other policy to review. Why don't we do that? And then before we adjourn, we can look at our calendars. Does that sound good? Okay, so we'll move on to agenda item 2B, which is a review of the public participation at board meetings, which is policy 169.1.
And I don't think this is something we need to review. I think there was a period of time that we wanted to make sure that what practice was aligning with our policy.
Is that why?
I
okay.
think so.
I think we came away from a board meeting early on where we said the policy committee should look at that the next time they meet. So
Thank
I had
you.
that with
That's-
Tracy's notes. So we put it on there just in case you wanted to talk about it, but there's nothing.
Nothing to change,
Nothing to
nothing that
change.
we've
I just
talked
think
about
we wanted to
changing.
keep that option open since it was a topic that was mentioned at the table.
Okay, and I think we're all comfortable with where we are on how we're handling public participation, so,
Yep.
okay, we're in a good place. Thank you. So item 3, approval of minutes. I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
I didn't even get there.
Oh, sorry.
You're good. From our September 30th, 2022 meeting. You second. Tracy, do you mind calling for the
Mrs.
vote?
Hudson,
Yes.
Mrs. Davis.
Yes.
Excellent. So before we make a motion to adjourn, we'll look at respective calendars. I assume we want to do this sooner rather than later, and that if our guests are not available we could always meet with them at a separate time just to understand where they are. We could probably divide and conquer, Kelly, on that even, with those individuals. So how soon do we want to do we want to get back together before the holidays? Let me just put that there.
No.
Okay. Then I would say we would do it very early in January, just to keep this ball rolling. When I throw out Friday the 6th.
Or
So Randy, Trent, and myself are traveling to Chicago to get a bond rating then.
That's a very important trip, so we will not
you're going to
attempt to interfere.
Chicago?
We have to get a bond rating for our debt.
Oh, yeah,
So we're
we
going
need to.
the 5th and 6th.
Movies after school hours, would that help you?
After school hours? You want to do it in December?
No, I'm saying, would it help you if we moved them to the evening?
Oh, no, not necessarily.
I just didn't
I
want
can
to.
do a later afternoon, like mornings are tricky, but
Okay, later.
afternoons are okay.
So what about the afternoon of the 5th then?
The 5th,
Mhm.
Thursday?
The 5th is when we leave, so
Oh.
we leave out that morning.
Okay, then never mind. So we're looking at the week of January 9th then.
Is that the board meeting?
I will just say, I'm going to pause for a second. Randy, do you feel like it's important that we get working on this sooner rather than later, that we try to find a time in December to start working on drafting it out?
Oh, I think January's fine. There's a lot of work that we can do internally over the break, because we'll be here. So I feel like as long as we know what policies we could potentially touch,
Yeah.
we could put together some options. And like,
Great.
I like what
I just
you
wanted to
said,
make sure.
like we could incorporate the already, currently there's a board policy or a board facilities committee. We could
Mhm.
rename that as part of their responsibilities to approve naming rights, unless you think the whole board needs to vote on that. Or they could make recommendations to the board, similar to this committee. But we could work on it and structure it so that we get some of the language ready. I think
Good.
you've given us enough guidance,
Okay.
but January.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
works, Yeah.
So, so yes, we will have a board meeting that week, which is fine. Can we look at the latter half of the week, the, afternoon of the 12th or the 13th?
I'm wide open.
Okay, let me look at I would say my paying job. 13th is better for me. Go ahead.
No, I said you may not be if they move the board meetings to Thursday night.
I know, I was thinking the same thing. Can we look at Friday afternoon then?
That's a good point. I mean, I guess as the board, are you two policy committee again? Have you guys
We
done-
don't know. But there might be carryover actually, just till the end of the school year. So let's say January 13th, 3 o'clock again? Or I guess we met at 2 or 3 o'clock. Any preferences?
I don't have a preference.
How long do you think it'll be?
I think 2 o'clock maybe, because.
Yeah, because it might take us a bit to work through wording, but if we have
Just
some
the
drafts
wording.
beforehand. Go ahead, Kelly.
I'm sorry. That was an interruption. You can finish.
No, I was just gonna say, if we have draft language beforehand, it's always easier. So 2 o'clock on the
Friday the 13th?
Friday the 13th, we make it a magical
Yeah.
Friday the 13th.
I was asking Tracy, is the room available?
The room is
Okay.
available.
Okay.
I'm booking it right
Okay,
now.
so we'll book that. If we end up changing committees in January versus going with the calendar school year, which I think is what's going to be proposed, then we'll regroup. But otherwise, we'll be here on the 13th. Good. Feels like a good next step.
Yeah, I'd be interested, if you talk to a professional in this area, I'd be interested in what suggestions they have, because, I think the challenges are finding the network and then trying to limit the strings that are attached. So if someone donates they want their name above the wrestling room, we can't guarantee that money's gonna go to wrestling. In fact, we may not be able to guarantee that it goes to athletics. But, just kind of separating that and sorting that out, I think that'll be a challenge, but
And that the only guarantee was that your name would be there.
Yeah, and
Or the funds
for
were
X
done.
number of years
Okay.
or until the building's demolished. I mean, I think we'd put that in there, but I don't know. Or, we'd have a clause that if there was like a citizenship issue that we couldn't continue to display that person's name. I don't know, if they were arrested or,
Right, yeah.
but
Actions that weren't becoming to the
yeah, it wouldn't
district or in
represent
line
the
with the
district.
district values.
And then I think tackling the corporate issue is something that I've thought about. Like, what if Ohio Health comes forward and says, we want this to be the Ohio Health training room
Mhm.
at our new field house? Fine, we'll put the plaque up. But what happens if 3 years from now, the district decides that we could get better services from a competitor in Columbus? Are we still going to have the Ohio Health training room with Children's Hospital doctors in there? Like, I don't know. There's some things that I've thought of, like you could use, preferred beverage company if it's the Pepsi, and then we
Pepsi.
just have to be aware that
Yeah.
there could be conflicts.
No, those are all
That's a
very
good
valid
point.
points. The individual that I know who's a professional fundraiser, if they're willing to have a conversation, I'll see if I can
That'd be
schedule that
great.
sooner rather than later, just to start vetting some of
Yep.
those and helping us understand what that landscape looks like.
You were asking too about the facilities committee voting.
Yeah, well,
I do think it should come to the whole board though.
I kind of feel like
Kelly, I do too.
it needs to be a broader group too. Like, it's basically, Tim, Jeff, and I, and then 2 board members. If this is really about naming something on the entire school district, like, I
Yeah.
feel like more people should weigh in on that,
Mhm.
because it looks, I don't know,
No, I hear you.
like, I don't
Well,
know.
I
think
think
that's
if we
what
get
coffee
volunteers
talks
to
is.
maybe do this, then maybe they become
Yeah,
members of that committee and it grows,
Yeah.
right?
we could, and I only picture like 1 or 2, like, I think there'll be like certain stopping points where you've collected X number of pledges, you bring them to a committee meeting and approve those, and then you work and you accumulate. I don't see it being like every week we get a new one and have to meet for that one.
Yeah.
It's you hold that pledge, and I think that's what that form referred to as reserved. Somebody filled out paperwork saying, I would like, and so they got first in line. So,
That makes sense.
yeah, it shouldn't be that. Just a lot of moving pieces.
A lot of moving pieces and new moving pieces, right?
Right.
That we're not privy to exactly the best
Right.
practices, and so we need some guidance on best practices in this
Absolutely.
space.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the best way to put it.
Okay, that's great.
Well, I
I'm
feel,
excited.
I
Good
feel
work.
pressure to end right at 3 since Nikki got here right at 2, so.
We'll be in the 3 o'clock
Excellent. I'll do
meeting.
a motion to adjourn. You second
So
that?
move, yes, second. Sorry.
I'm,
Miss
go ahead.
Sutton,
Yes,
Mrs. Davis.
Yes.
wonderful. Thanks for a really productive meeting, you guys.